The night was supposed to be perfect. Magnolia Hall looked like something out of a wedding magazine: string lights, white roses, and too many people pretending to be happy for us. I'd spent weeks planning every small detail. Dylan didn't lift a finger, but that was normal. He liked to arrive at things, not help build them. He was already late when the speeches started. Guests whispered it off as nerves, but my stomach told me something was off. I went looking for him. Every step down that hallway felt heavier. When I reached the side room near the ballroom, I heard a low laugh, his laugh, and a woman's voice that didn't belong there. I opened the door. There he was, my fiancé, the man who swore I was his future. And in his arms, Rachel Evans, his ex. The woman he'd once called a closed chapter. They froze, like teenagers caught behind the gym. His hand was still on her waist. Hers was on his tie. I didn't say a word, neither did she. But Dylan did. Of course he did. He stepped forward, adjusted his cufflinks, and said loudly enough for the two waiters and my best friend standing behind me to hear, "My ex, Rachel Evans, will always be part of my life. If you can't accept that, Brooke, this marriage ends here." There it was. Public, polished, humiliating. I remember the exact pause that followed. The jazz from the ballroom drifted in through the open door. Someone coughed. Rachel looked down, pretending not to breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I just said, "Okay, then I won't." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. And for the first time in months, he didn't have the last word. I turned around, heels clicking on the marble, and walked out. People saw me half of Savannah society, probably. Someone dropped a glass. I think my mother's cousin gasped. I just kept walking. The doorman held the main entrance for me. "Leaving so soon, Miss Allen? Seems like the groom's already taken," I said. Outside, the night air was heavy with rain. I stood under the awning, looking at the reflection of the chandelier through the window, two figures still standing too close. Then I laughed, quietly. Not because it was funny, but because I realized something. I'd been rehearsing the role of a future wife while he was already writing a sequel with his past. I called for my car. The valet hesitated, probably thought I was drunk or emotional. I wasn't either. I tipped him 20 and said, "Keep the engine running. I'm done waiting for anyone." As I sat behind the wheel, the music from inside faded into nothing. The engagement ring sparkled on my hand like it was mocking me. I slipped it off, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and whispered, "You can keep her. I'll keep my dignity." Then I drove away. And just like that, the night that was supposed to mark the beginning of forever turned into the quietest goodbye of my life. I didn't know it then, but silence would become my sharpest weapon. If you've ever been through something that felt just like this, where someone embarrassed you and you walked out anyway, drop a comment below. I read every one of them. And if you love true cheating stories, revenge stories, and husband betrayal that feel real, subscribe for more. The road out of Magnolia Hall was empty, wet from rain. My headlights cut through the mist, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to fix what was never broken by you. The wipers squeaked against the windshield as I drove through downtown Savannah. The rain had turned the streets into a blur of light and reflection, and every red light felt like it was waiting for me to cry. I didn't. My face stayed still, my hands steady on the wheel. Somewhere between the hotel and my apartment, I realized I wasn't even shaking. The silence inside the car was strange. I'd spent years with Dylan talking over every song, arguing about podcasts, filling the air with his voice. Now, the quiet was almost comforting. I rolled the window down a little and let the cold air hit my face. It felt cleaner than anything I'd heard him say in months. By the time I parked outside my building, my phone had 23 missed calls. Dylan, my mother, my best friend, even his sister. I turned it face down and left it on the passenger seat. Not everything deserved a response. Inside my apartment, the lights were soft, almost too calm compared to the chaos of that ballroom. I kicked off my heels, hung the soaked dress over a chair, and stood there for a long minute. The silence felt like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The engagement ring sat in my palm, heavy, shiny, stupid. I put it in the kitchen drawer next to the batteries and scissors. That's where things you might need one day, but probably never will end up. Then I took out my notebook. It wasn't fancy, just a small leather-bound journal I used for sketches and to-do lists. I turned to a new page and wrote, Step 1. Walk away. Underneath it, I added, Step 2. Don't explain. It looked neat, clean, like a plan instead of heartbreak. I liked that. Plans made sense. People didn't. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla candles and rain through the open window. I brewed a cup of tea just to have something warm in my hands. My reflection in the window looked oddly composed. If someone had walked in right then, they might have thought I'd just come home from a long day at work, not from ending an engagement in front of 50 witnesses. The phone buzzed again. Another call from Dylan. I watched it light up on the counter. Then another text popped up. You're overreacting. It was just honesty. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Honesty, I said out loud, almost laughing. That's what you call humiliation now? I slid the phone into a drawer and turned on my laptop instead. I searched Savannah divorce lawyer and found one name repeated across reviews. Olivia Torres. The reviews called her sharp, discreet, relentless. Exactly the kind of woman I needed on my side. I bookmarked her site and sent a short message through the contact form. Hi. I'd like to discuss canceling an engagement and protecting assets. Discretion preferred. I didn't add details. I didn't need to. I just wanted to move. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for Dylan to fix anything. I wasn't trying to patch up the version of him I'd built in my head. I was done building anything for him at all. When I finally sat on the couch, it was nearly midnight. The city outside had quieted down, except for the occasional car passing through puddles. The sound was steady, grounding. I leaned back, feeling the exhaustion catch up, but it wasn't emotional. It was like my body was rebooting after years of running on someone else's chaos. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, slicing across the hardwood floor. I woke up to it and felt a strange kind of peace. No hangover of regret, no wave of confusion, just clarity. My phone was still buzzing somewhere in the kitchen. I ignored it, brushed my hair, and made coffee. The world hadn't ended. The engagement hadn't destroyed me. It had just ended. I opened the notebook again and added a third line. Step 3. Stay quiet. Let the noise burn itself out. That became my rule. No reaction posts. No explanations to friends. No defending myself to people who love drama more than truth. When I finally checked my email, there was a reply from Olivia's office. Miss Torres can meet you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Please bring any relevant documents or contracts. Perfect. I closed my laptop, took a long sip of coffee, and looked around my apartment, the one I decorated myself, paid for myself, lived in before Dylan's opinions started rearranging everything. For the first time in a long time, the space felt like mine again. The rain had stopped. Sunlight hit the small vase of lilies on the counter, turning the petals almost white. I laughed under my breath, realizing how absurdly peaceful it felt after the night before. Peace doesn't need permission, it just needs a decision. I packed a folder with receipts, the venue contract, and my copy of the engagement agreement. Then I picked up my keys and walked out. The morning air smelled like wet asphalt and new beginnings. I didn't check the mirror before I left. I didn't need to. Whatever I looked like, it was enough for the day ahead. The next morning, the city felt different, like it had quietly decided to start over with me. I drove downtown to meet Olivia Torres, the lawyer whose voice on the phone sounded sharper than most people's thoughts. Her office was inside an old brick building with black window frames, and a door that didn't squeak even though it looked like it should. Everything about the place said efficiency disguised as charm. Olivia greeted me with a calm handshake. "You must be Brooke," she said, motioning me to sit. "You're early. That's usually a good sign." "I didn't sleep much," I said, handing her a folder. "These are the contracts, deposits, invoices, everything from the engagement." She glanced at the stack. "You're organized. I like that." Then, without looking up, she asked, "What exactly do you want from this?" "Peace," I said. "And control." That made her smile. Then you came to the right person. Our end. We spent the next hour going through the details. She didn't sugarcoat a thing. I appreciated that. She told me exactly what I could do, what I couldn't, and what Dylan might try if he wanted to make it messy. People who humiliate others in public don't usually handle silence well, she said, tapping her pen against a contract. They start to panic when they realize the performance is over. I nodded. He's already texting like it's still his show. Good, she said. Keep the messages. Don't respond. Silence is documentation too. That line stuck with me. Silence is documentation. I could already feel it working. By the time we wrapped up, Olivia had drafted a notice of cancellation for all the wedding contracts, including the venue, catering, and photography. You'll lose a few deposits, she said, but you'll gain your footing back. And that's worth a hell of a lot more than money. I signed every page without hesitation. The pen didn't shake once. Walking out of her office, I felt something I hadn't felt since before I met Dylan. Clarity. Not happiness, not triumph, just a clean sense of direction. Like finally switching off background noise you didn't realize had been blaring for years. Outside, the streets were still damp from last night's rain. The air smelled like coffee and wet leaves. I grabbed a latte from the cafe across the street and sat by the window. The phone buzzed again. Dylan. I stared at it for a moment before turning it face down. He didn't deserve my reaction, and I wasn't going to perform for him anymore. The text preview flashed once before the screen dimmed. You're being dramatic. We just had a misunderstanding. I smirked. That's one way to describe kissing your ex during our engagement, I muttered to myself. A notification from Olivia came through moments later. All notices have been sent. I'll forward confirmation from the vendors this afternoon. It was done. Clean, official, irreversible. Back at my apartment, I opened my notebook again. Under the last line, Step 3. Stay quiet. I added a new one. Step 4. Act like it's already over. Because it is. The phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Brooke. Dylan's voice snapped through, too familiar and too confident. You can't just cancel everything without talking to me first. I just did, I said, keeping my tone steady. This is insane. I told you Rachel means nothing. She's just part of my life, not like... Stop, I interrupted. You don't get to explain this like it's a scheduling conflict. You're overreacting, he shot back. And you're under-evolving, I said before hanging up. The phone rang again immediately, but I powered it off. That conversation was over before it started. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. There's something therapeutic about removing every trace of a person who thought they owned space in your life. I boxed up the wedding samples, returned the ring to its velvet box, and slid it under the bed. Not to keep it, just to make sure it was out of sight until I decided what to do with it. Then I made a small but satisfying change. I took down the framed photo of us from the hallway and replaced it with one of the ocean. Calm, endless, and untouchable. Later, Olivia emailed again. All vendors confirmed cancellations. You're free of any future obligations. Congratulations. It was the first time anyone had used the word congratulations for something that wasn't tied to Dylan. It felt right. That night, I sat on the couch with a bowl of takeout noodles and a glass of wine. My apartment was quiet, except for the sound of the rain starting up again outside. I didn't feel sad or angry. I felt aware. Dylan wanted me to react, to beg, to fight, because fighting would still mean he mattered. But he didn't. Not anymore. I grabbed the notebook one more time and drew a small box next to Step 4. Then I checked it off. For once, the plan wasn't about rebuilding us. It was about rebuilding me. The rain tapped against the window like a reminder that even storms sound softer once you stop standing in the middle of them. The next day at work, I kept my head down. Most people pretended not to know about the engagement fiasco, but offices have their own gossip ecosystems, and bad news travels faster than promotions. I was reviewing client plans when I heard a familiar voice behind me, too smooth, too self-assured to be anyone else. Brooke, Dylan said, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't publicly crashed and burned at one of the most expensive venues in Savannah. I didn't turn around immediately. You shouldn't be here, I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. I needed to explain, he replied. What you saw, it wasn't what it looked like. I turned my chair slowly, just to watch him squirm. He was holding a bouquet roses, of course. The go-to apology for men who run out of ideas and integrity at the same time. You were kissing your ex, Dylan, I said. If that's not what it looked like, then maybe you should tell me what it was. A CPR class? He sighed, the kind of fake exhaustion men use when they're cornered. Rachel and I were just talking. It got emotional. I didn't mean for it to happen. Right, I said. Accidental intimacy happens to the best of us. He frowned, clearly not used to me talking back without tears attached. You're being cold. And you're being delusional, I said. That's a tough combination for a happy ending. Dylan set the flowers on my desk like they were some kind of peace treaty. Look, I was being honest that night. That's why I said she'll always be part of my life. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I laughed quietly. You said that to my face, in front of everyone. If that's your idea of honesty, I'd hate to see your definition of cruelty. His jaw tightened. I didn't deserve to be embarrassed like that. You made me look bad. That one got a real laugh out of me. You made yourself look bad, Dylan. I just stopped covering for it. And for a second, he didn't have a comeback. His lips parted, like he wanted to keep fighting, but nothing came out. That silence was priceless. He finally said, You think walking away makes you strong? No, I said. It makes me sane. There was a long pause before he muttered something about throwing everything away. I stood, walked around the desk, and handed him back the bouquet. You can keep these. I'm allergic to recycled gestures. Oh? He stared at me, clearly thrown off by how calm I was. You really don't care, do you? I smiled. Oh, I care. Just not in the way that keeps you relevant. He left without another word, but not before giving me that look, the one that said he couldn't believe I wasn't chasing after him. I waited until he was gone before exhaling. One of my coworkers peeked over the cubicle wall. Was that? Yep, I said. And no, it wasn't worth it. I mean, Ed. The rest of the day moved on like nothing had happened. That's the thing about heartbreak in the real world, it doesn't get a soundtrack. You still have to finish your emails and eat lunch at your desk. When I got home, I found another text waiting for me. I just wanted to talk. I'm not the bad guy here. I typed a reply, stared at it, and deleted it. Talking to him now would be like arguing with smoke. It only fills the room if you let it. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and opened my notebook again. Step 5. Don't argue with explanations. Let them talk to the silence. That became my mantra. The next day, Olivia called. He contacted you, didn't he? Of course he did, I said. Apologies are his favorite form of damage control. She chuckled softly. Ignore it. Every word he says is evidence of control slipping. I could hear the rustle of papers on her end. You're handling this well, Brooke. Most people fall apart when they're humiliated. I don't do public meltdowns, I said. That's his thing. Later that night, I went for a walk through Forsyth Park. The air smelled of magnolia and rain again, the same mix from the night everything fell apart. Couples strolled past me, some laughing, some arguing softly. I didn't feel bitter. I just noticed how often love and conflict shared the same sidewalk. I stopped near the fountain, listening to the water drown out the city noise. My phone buzzed again. Dylan, again. I powered it off without checking the message. Some stories didn't deserve rereading. Back home, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and studied my reflection. Same woman, different clarity. I looked tired, but calm, like someone who had stopped negotiating her worth. I whispered to the mirror, almost amused. He really thought I'd crumble. That thought made me laugh. And it wasn't forced this time. Outside, the rain started up again, tapping softly against the glass. I didn't turn on music or light candles. I didn't need comfort, just quiet. In the distance, thunder rolled once deep and low, and for a second, I could almost hear Olivia's voice in my head. Silence is documentation. It really was. Because sometimes, silence is also the sound of everything starting to make sense. The morning after that awkward office visit, I packed. No dramatic music, No crying over closets, just quiet efficiency. I moved through the apartment like I was crossing items off a list. The wedding dress went back into its box. The floral samples, the fabric swatches, the table layout charts, all into a cardboard pile labeled return or burn. Every sound in the apartment seemed too loud. The tape ripping, the cabinet doors closing, the zipper of my suitcase. I'd spent years building a space that looked like us. Now it was just me. And that was already better. The doorbell rang once. I froze, hoping it wasn't him. When I checked the peephole, it wasn't Dylan, it was my mother. Linda Allen had never been one for subtlety. She stood there with a paper bag of pastries and that half-concerned, half-critical look only mothers can pull off. "Morning," she said, stepping inside before I could answer. Her eyes swept across the half-empty living room. "So, it's true. Mex? Which part?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "The part where you left him standing in front of an audience," she said, setting the bag down. "People talk, Brooke." "Let them," I said, pouring coffee. "It saves me from doing interviews." She sighed. "You always did get that stubborn streak from your father." I looked up. I got the boundaries from him too. For a moment, she didn't have a response. Then, quieter, "I'm proud of you for walking out. Just make sure you don't turn silence into isolation." That one landed. My mother had survived her own version of public humiliation. My father's gambling problem had nearly bankrupted them once. She rebuilt quietly, the same way I was doing now. Maybe I hadn't fallen that far from the tree after all. She stayed for coffee, mostly talking about her garden and the neighbor's cat that kept eating her herbs. When she finally left, she squeezed my shoulder and said, "Keep your head high, baby. People respect the woman who doesn't need to shout to be heard." When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. I turned on some music, not sad, just background jazz, the kind that fills a room without asking for attention. As the day went on, I filled 2 suitcases and a small box of essentials. The rest could wait. That evening, I signed a short-term lease for a small apartment in Grant Park. It wasn't fancy, but it had something my old place never did. Peace. No echoes of arguments, no reminders of someone else's preferences. When I picked up the keys, the landlord, a woman in her 50s, with sharp glasses and soft eyes, said, "It's a good place for a fresh start." "Perfect," I said. "That's exactly what I'm buying." The next morning, I moved in with the help of one friend, Melissa, who didn't ask for details. She just carried boxes, cracked jokes, and kept the mood light. "You sure you're okay?" she asked while we arranged furniture. "I'm better than I've been in years," I said, tightening a screw on the coffee table. "Turns out peace and space are underrated." She nodded. "You always made chaos look organized. Maybe now you'll just make peace look expensive." We laughed, and that was it. No therapy speeches, no tears, just the calm satisfaction of moving forward. That night, after she left, I unpacked slowly. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 living room, but it felt like a reset button. I placed a single vase with white lilies on the counter. They weren't there for decoration, they were there for air. When I finished unpacking, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker through the blinds. Somewhere out there, Dylan was probably busy spinning his version of the story, maybe blaming stress or misunderstanding. It didn't matter. The truth didn't need defending when it had receipts. I opened my notebook and added another line. Step 6. Don't chase closure. Just move. The sound of rain began again, soft at first, then steadier. Savannah had a habit of making even storms sound poetic. I let it play in the background as I scrolled through my emails, mostly work updates, and a message from Olivia confirming all contracts were settled. Then one new notification popped up, a reply from the owner of the Mercer House, the restoration project I'd applied for weeks ago. "We'd like to move forward with you as the lead interior designer. Meeting this Friday at noon, if you're available." I leaned back and smiled. The timing felt almost surgical, like the universe was saying, "Enough endings. Time to build something." I replied immediately, "Friday works. See you then." For the first time in a long time, I felt anticipation without anxiety. Not because of a man or a promise, but because of purpose. As the rain tapped against the glass, I looked around my quiet little apartment. There were no photos on the wall yet, no shared toothbrushes, no expectations waiting to be met. Just me, a half-empty bottle of wine, and a growing sense that silence could be home. I got up, poured one last glass, and stood by the window. Down on the street, the lamplight glowed over puddles, and for a moment, I caught my reflection in the glass, calm, steady, unbothered. The kind of woman who doesn't wait for peace. She rents it, decorates it, and calls it her own. By the end of that week, my phone started ringing again this time, not from Dylan, but from people who suddenly remembered they knew me. Savannah has a way of turning private moments into small-town entertainment. My engagement had turned into a social event, and now my silence was the sequel everyone wanted to discuss. At first I ignored it, but then came the texts. He said you overreacted. He told people you walked out because of nerves. Are you two back together? I didn't respond. Every message got the same treatment, deleted, without reading past the first line. Let them build whatever story helped them sleep at night. The truth didn't need an audience. It just needed time. At the design firm, whispers came with coffee. I heard my name more in the break room that week than in the past 2 years combined. Poor Brooke, one assistant murmured. Imagine finding out your fiancé's still in love with his ex. The other woman, someone new, someone young, said, I don't know. Maybe she should have tried to understand. People have history. I turned the corner just as she said it. Their faces froze like mannequins caught blinking. I smiled. History doesn't need to live in the present, I said, and kept walking. They didn't speak again after that. By Wednesday, I realized Dylan was doing what men like him always did, rewriting the script to make himself look like the misunderstood hero. According to him, he was just honest about his past. I was the dramatic bride who couldn't handle real love. Sure, because nothing says real love like public humiliation. Olivia called me that afternoon. He's spinning it? She asked. Like a politician, I said. He's probably writing campaign slogans in his sleep. Let him, she replied. Liars always choke on their own PR. You don't have to say a word. Just keep living well. That's the part that gets them. She was right. Nothing irritates a narcissist like someone they can't provoke. That evening, I went for a run around Grant Park. The air smelled of rain and pine, and for once, I didn't think about him. I thought about breathing, about pace, about how strange it felt to finally move without waiting for approval. When I got back, I made dinner, poured a glass of wine, and turned on the news just for noise. Halfway through, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. You really think keeping quiet makes you the bigger person? Everyone's talking about what you did to him. I laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that's half disbelief, half relief. Because when people resort to anonymous texts, it means you've already won the narrative. I typed a single reply. Good, let them talk. I'm busy. Then, I blocked the number. The next morning, I ran into Melissa at a cafe downtown. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure how much truth I could handle. Don't take this the wrong way, she said, lowering her voice. But Dylan's been calling people, trying to fix his image. I stirred my coffee slowly. Of course he is. Men like Dylan don't apologize. They rebrand. Melissa smiled, almost proud. You're taking this too well. It's kind of unnerving. I'm not taking it well, I said. I'm just not wasting it. That made her pause. Wasting what? The lesson, I said. I worked too hard for peace to trade it for revenge that isn't worth my time. By that afternoon, I realized something else. My silence wasn't just confusing people, it was unsettling them. Dylan's story was falling apart because I wasn't playing my assigned role. He needed my outrage to prove his innocence. Without it, he just looked guilty. Later that week, an email came from a former acquaintance, someone who'd once called herself Rachel's friend. It said, he's trying to say you were jealous of her. Thought you should know. She doesn't even talk to him anymore. That part made me smile. It seemed even Rachel had learned faster than I expected. I replied with 2 words. Appreciate it. Then I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment. The boxes were mostly unpacked now. The lilies on the counter had started to wilt, but they still smelled clean. I replaced them with new ones that evening, white tulips this time. Something about that simple act felt symbolic, but not in a dramatic way. Just quiet maintenance. The next day at the firm, one of the directors pulled me aside. "Brooke, I heard about what happened," he said awkwardly. "For what it's worth, you handled yourself with grace. People remember that." "Thanks," I said. "Grace is cheaper than drama." He laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. By Friday, the gossip cycle had already shifted to something new: a client scandal, a failed merger, someone's affair in accounting. That's the thing about rumor mills. They burn hot and die fast when you don't feed them. That night, I cooked pasta, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window while the city hummed outside. My phone stayed quiet, which was a blessing. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Step 7. Let the lies collapse on their own. They always do." I closed the book and leaned back, listening to the soft hum of rain outside. The world kept spinning, with or without his noise. And for once, I was perfectly fine letting it. The following Monday started differently. I wasn't dragging myself to the firm out of obligation. I was walking into something that actually felt alive. The Mercer House project had officially begun, and I'd been named lead designer. For once, I wasn't the woman from the broken engagement story. I was the woman rebuilding a historic mansion in downtown Savannah. When I arrived at the site, the place looked like a memory that refused to die. The front gate leaned sideways, ivy crawled across cracked brick, and the windows had forgotten how to shine. But the bones were good. You could feel the structure's pride under all the neglect. "Beautiful mess, isn't it?" a voice called out from behind me. I turned to see Evan Cole, the property owner and project investor. He looked like someone who'd spent his whole life around blueprints and sawdust. Late 30s, sharp but calm, the kind of man who noticed small details before he spoke. "Beautiful's one word for it," I said, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. "Mess fits too." He smiled, offering a hand. "Evan Cole, thanks for taking this on. The last designer wanted to tear down half the house." "I'm not in the demolition business," I replied. "I like saving things that still have structure." End quote. "Then we'll get along just fine." We walked through the grand entryway together, stepping carefully across warped floorboards. The ceiling was half open to the sky. Dust motes floated in the light. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos I could organize. As we toured, Evan asked about my design approach. I told him I preferred honest restoration. "You don't erase history," I said. "You reveal it." He nodded. "That's exactly what I want for this place." When he said that, something clicked. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about me. I'd been busy erasing my own history these past weeks, trying to make it look like Dylan never happened. But maybe the right thing to do wasn't to erase, but to reveal what survived. That afternoon, I stayed long after the contractors left, sketching out layout ideas in the fading light. The smell of wood, plaster, and rain filled the air. For the first time in months, my mind was quiet. Evan came back near dusk, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Still working?" he asked. "Always," I said. "I don't really do idle." He handed me one of the cups. Then we're the same kind of people. We stood there, sipping coffee among scaffolding and dust. There was no flirtation, no tension, just mutual respect, the kind that comes when 2 people recognize they're rebuilding something from ruins. "You know," Evan said after a moment, "houses like this, they're stubborn. You can patch, repaint, replace parts, but they never forget their cracks." "Good," I said quietly. "That's how you know they're real." He smiled faintly. "That sounds personal." "It is," I said. Later that week, as the work picked up, I found a rhythm again. Mornings began with coffee and site plans. Afternoons ended with meetings and late drives home through the oak-lined streets. The gossip about Dylan had faded completely. He'd moved on to a new rumor cycle, or maybe just a new victim of his honesty. Either way, the quiet was welcome. One afternoon, while reviewing materials, Evan leaned against a beam beside me. "You ever think about what makes something worth restoring?" he asked. "All the time," I said, tracing my pen along the blueprint. "It's not about how broken it is. It's about whether it still has a foundation that can hold." He nodded slowly. And if it doesn't? Then you start over, I said. But you do it smarter next time. He smiled. You talk like someone who's already rebuilt a few times. Maybe once, I said, keeping my tone light. For a few seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of a saw outside. Then he said, You're not like most people I've worked with. You don't talk about design like it's decoration. You talk about it like it's therapy. Maybe it is, I said. Except cheaper and with better lighting. I rayed. He laughed, a real one. Not the kind you fake for politeness. That evening, after the team left, I stayed behind to finish measurements. When I finally stepped out, the sunset was painting the city gold. I stood at the gate, watching the light stretch across the old bricks. Something about it reminded me that beauty wasn't about perfection, it was about endurance. When I got home, I opened my notebook again. Step 8. Rebuild what's worth keeping. Don't waste effort on what needs to fall. I read it twice before closing the book. My hands were still dusty from the sight, but they didn't shake anymore. That was progress. Before bed, I checked my messages. There was one new email from the firm's HR department confirming my promotion on the Mercer account. A quiet acknowledgement of hard work, not loud, not showy, but earned. And buried under the spam folder, one unread message from Dylan. Heard you're doing some charity project downtown. Glad to see you're keeping busy. I deleted it without opening it further. In that moment, I realized something Dylan would never understand. Peace isn't found in proving someone wrong. It's found in building something they'll never be part of again. The next morning, I put on my hard hat, rolled up my sleeves, and walked back into the Mercer house. It was still a wreck, peeling paint, cracked columns, forgotten corners, but I could already see it. The finished version, stronger, brighter, standing tall again. Exactly how I planned to be. The week the new windows were installed at Mercer House, the air finally smelled like progress, sawdust, paint, and something almost like pride. I was on the scaffolding reviewing details with the crew when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. I didn't pay attention at first. Clients dropped by all the time. But when I heard his voice, too familiar, too smooth, it hit like static down my spine. Brooke! I froze. I didn't need to turn to know it was Dylan. The foreman gave me a questioning look. Friend of yours? Something like that, I said. I climbed down, brushing dust off my hands. Dylan stood near the entrance, too polished for a construction site, pressed shirt, designer watch, fake calm. The kind of man who'd rehearsed his tone in the car mirror before coming. This isn't the place, Dylan, I said, stopping a few feet away. He smiled like he was at a cocktail party. You look good. Construction life suits you. Adieu. Don't, I said flatly. He ignored it. Can we talk? Just 5 minutes. No, I replied. You had your speech in front of hundreds of people. That should have been enough. He sighed dramatically. I came to apologize. That word hit the air like a cliché perfume, cheap and overused. You're late, I said. Brooke, come on, he pressed. I made a mistake. I was under stress. I didn't mean what I said that night. I folded my arms. You said your ex would always be part of your life, and that if I didn't like it, the marriage was off. Which part of that was the accident, the words, or the audience? He blinked, thrown. I was trying to be honest. No, you were trying to be powerful, I said. You wanted to see if I'd stay small while you felt big. He looked wounded, but I'd seen that face before. It was his favorite trick, the sad, misunderstood hero act. I thought honesty was what you wanted. End quote. Honesty is what you give before you humiliate someone, I said quietly. What you did was theater. Behind me, the construction crew had gone silent, pretending to check blueprints but clearly listening. Evan appeared at the doorway, holding a clipboard. His expression didn't change, but his presence was grounding steady, silent authority. Everything all right here? Evan asked, tone neutral but sharp enough to cut tension. Dylan glanced at him, visibly irritated. Who's this? This is the property owner, I said, and the man you're interrupting while we work. Evan nodded politely. Mr. Pierce, Dylan said, straightening. Her fiancé. Ex, I corrected without hesitation. The correction hung between us. Even the air paused. Dylan's jaw tightened. So this is what you do now? You run away and hide behind new men? Evan didn't flinch. She doesn't need to hide behind anyone. You're the one standing in a construction zone demanding attention. The look Dylan shot him could have stripped paint. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe not, Evan said calmly. But I do know what boundaries look like, and you're standing on the wrong side of one. For a second, I thought Dylan might lunge. Instead, he laughed an empty sound that bounced off the brick walls. You know, Brooke, everyone told me you were dramatic, but I didn't think you'd sink this low. Oh, well. Low? I said. You humiliated me in public? Lied to half the city? And now you're lecturing me on class? He stepped forward, lowering his voice. You're making me look like a fool. You did that yourself, I said. All I did was stop clapping. Something in his face shifted. Then anger, confusion, maybe both. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. I think I'm finally myself. And, for a moment, we just stood there. Two people who had once planned a life together, now speaking like strangers, negotiating peace after a war. Then Dylan did something that made my stomach turn. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. The engagement ring. The same one I'd left on the table that night. Take it, he said, his voice shaking. Let's just start over. I stared at the ring. Same diamond, same illusion. It used to symbolize everything I thought love meant: commitment, trust, future. Now it just looked like proof of how well people can lie to themselves. I shook my head. You don't get to erase what happened just because you're uncomfortable with the consequences. He looked genuinely lost now. So, that's it? After everything? After everything, I said firmly. Now leave. He didn't move at first. Then Evan stepped closer, not threatening, just steady. You heard her. That broke him. Dylan shoved the ring box back into his pocket, muttered something about regret, and stormed out, his expensive shoes crunching against gravel. When the SUV finally disappeared down the street, the site went quiet again. A few workers exchanged looks, then went back to work like nothing had happened. Evan turned to me. You okay? I exhaled, the kind of slow breath that carries weeks of tension. Yeah, I said. That was overdue. He nodded, offering a faint smile. You handled that better than most people would. I've had practice, I said, brushing dust off my sleeve. He chuckled softly. You sure you're ready to get back to work? I looked up at the building, cracked but standing, tired but repairable. More than ever. Evan nodded. Then let's rebuild. As I walked back toward the scaffolding, I could still feel Dylan's last words echo faintly in my head, but they didn't sting anymore. They were just noise from a room I'd already left. The sound of hammers started again, steady and rhythmic. Each strike echoed through the walls like a reminder. There's power in walking away, and peace in never looking back. 2 days after Dylan's little performance at the construction site, I got a message that stopped me mid-sip of coffee. Hi, Brooke. This is Rachel Evans. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I think we need to talk. Just once. For a second, I thought it was a prank. Then I checked the number. It was real. I stared at the text for a long moment, wondering what on earth she could want. Maybe another apology. Maybe closure. Maybe another performance like his. But something in the wording felt different. Direct. Almost weary. I typed back. One time. Somewhere public. We met the next afternoon at a quiet cafe on the edge of downtown, one of those old brick places that smells like cinnamon and rain. When I walked in, she was already there, perfect posture, tailored coat, a calm expression that didn't match the gossip I'd heard about her. Brooke, she said, standing to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, her voice steady. Thank you for coming. I'll admit, I said, sitting across from her. This wasn't on my bingo card for the week. A faint smile crossed her lips. Fair. It's not on mine either. Hem. The waiter brought coffee, and for a moment we just sat there, the hum of conversation filling the air around the silence between us. She was the first to speak. I didn't come to defend him. Or myself. I just wanted to clear the air. Then let's, I said. She took a deep breath. Dylan and I ended things long before you two got together. But he never really ended them in his mind. Every time he felt lost, or insecure, or needed someone to remind him how great he was, he called me. Not because he loved me, but because I was the one who knew how to feed his ego. That stung not because of jealousy, but because it fit him too well. I tried to cut ties, she continued, looking down at her cup. I moved on. I even started dating someone new. But Dylan has this way of turning guilt into gravity. He pulls you back in with it. He used the same lines, "You're irreplaceable. No one understands me like you do." I guess he just recycled them with you in public. Amen. I almost laughed, but the sound caught halfway in my throat. So when he made that grand speech at the engagement party, she shook her head. I didn't know he was going to do that. I found out when someone sent me a video clip. I was mortified. He never asked, never warned me. I hadn't spoken to him for weeks before that night. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The waiter refilled our coffees. Outside, the afternoon light turned gold against the windows. I used to hate you, I admitted quietly. Not because I knew you, just because you existed. Rachel looked up, her eyes softer now. I used to hate you too, she said. For the same reason. That honesty broke something brittle and ugly, that had been sitting between us without form. We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was finally absurd. I think, she said slowly, Dylan confuses possession with affection. He doesn't love women, he curates them. You're proof of success. I was proof of loyalty. He built his identity around what he could keep, not what he could value. That line stayed with me. It explained more than any apology could. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, turning it toward me. On the screen was a photo of her and a man about my age, smiling under a vineyard archway. This is Mark, she said. We're getting married in the fall, and I need Dylan out of my life completely before then. Something in her tone wasn't bitterness, it was exhaustion. The kind that comes from surviving someone's endless need for control. I'm glad you reached out, I said honestly. Because for a while, I kept thinking maybe I'd overreacted, that maybe I was too cold. Rachel gave a small, knowing smile. No, Brooke, you were the only one who reacted like a sane person. You drew a line. I should have done that years ago. She took a sip of her coffee, then added, He's spiraling, you know. Business isn't going well. He's losing clients, friends. But you don't need to worry, his downfall has nothing to do with you. It's just who he is catching up to him. I nodded slowly. That sounds like karma with a calendar. We shared another quiet laugh. Then she said something I didn't expect. You should be proud. You showed everyone what dignity looks like when it walks away. That hit harder than I wanted it to. When we stood to leave, she extended her hand again. I hope the next time we meet, it's for something good, she said. Like a ribbon cutting at my next project, I said. Exactly. As she walked away, I watched her blend into the street crowd, just another person moving on with her life. It was strange how, for months, her name had been a ghost in every room I entered. And now, she was just human. On my way home, the sky over Savannah was streaked with orange and gray, the same colors from the night everything had fallen apart. But this time, they didn't look tragic. They looked clean. Back in my apartment, I opened my notebook and wrote, Step 9. The truth doesn't always hurt. Sometimes it heals by subtraction. Then I closed it, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. Across the street, a couple laughed as they ran through the drizzle, holding one umbrella between them. I didn't envy them. I just felt calm. That conversation hadn't reopened a wound, it had sealed it. Whatever Dylan still said, whatever rumors still lingered, they no longer lived in me. And that, I realized, was the quietest form of revenge there was. The morning after my meeting with Rachel, Savannah woke to one of those heavy gray skies that seemed to press everything quieter. The streets were damp, the air thick with the kind of calm that feels like something's about to change. I walked into Mercer House early, coffee in hand, ready to lose myself in work. Evan was already there, standing near the front steps with his phone to his ear. His expression was tight, the way people look when they're trying to stay professional while hearing something bad. When he hung up, he turned to me. You should see this, he said, handing me his phone. The local news page showed a familiar photo Dylan, smiling in one of those business headshots he used for press releases. The headline read, Financial advisor Dylan Pierce under investigation for fraudulent client accounts. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't even anger. It was something slower, quieter, like watching a storm roll across the horizon that you already escaped from. Evan watched my face. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said softly. "It was bound to happen. He's been playing with borrowed time for years." He nodded. "Still, I figured you'd want to know before everyone else starts talking." I appreciated that. In small towns like Savannah, news doesn't travel, it runs. By noon, people were already whispering about it. At the design firm, I caught a few coworkers glancing at me, pretending not to. One even stopped by my desk, her tone light but fishing. "Crazy about Dylan, huh? You must be relieved you got out when you did." I smiled politely. "I didn't get out, I walked out." That shut her up. By the end of the day, my phone was full of messages from numbers I hadn't heard from since the engagement. Some were apologies disguised as curiosity. Others were straight-up gossip. I deleted every one of them. That evening, while reviewing blueprints, Evan stopped by my table. "You sure you're not taking this personally?" "I took it personally once," I said. "Now I just take it as proof that silence is underrated." He smiled faintly. "Most people would have gone on social media by now." And most people mistake noise for justice," I said. "I don't." He looked at me for a moment like he was studying something rare. "You ever realize that quiet can be intimidating?" "Only when you've got something to hide," I replied. The next morning, I walked past a small cafe downtown and caught sight of Dylan through the window. He was sitting alone, slouched, staring at his phone like it might still hold his reputation. For a brief second, he looked up and our eyes met through the glass. No words, no gestures, just silence. He didn't wave. I didn't nod. There was nothing left to acknowledge. Back at the site, the painters had started covering the walls with a soft cream shade. The Mercer house was beginning to look like itself again, refined, composed, quietly strong. I realized that's exactly what I wanted my life to look like too. In the afternoon, I received a call from Olivia, my lawyer, and the quiet voice of reason who had helped me cancel the engagement contracts months ago. "Brooke, you're officially in the clear," she said. "You're not tied to any of his pending legal matters. No shared accounts, no overlapping liability." "Good," I said. "Thank you. By the way," she added, "you were smart to pull your name from that joint property filing when you did. It's about to get messy." "I've had practice in messes," I said with a small laugh. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and opened my notebook again. Step 10. When they fall, don't watch, just keep building. I wrote it down slowly, feeling every word like a quiet promise. The funny thing was, I didn't feel triumphant, just balanced. Dylan's downfall wasn't my doing it, was his choices, catching up one by one like overdue bills. And I realized that was the best part. I hadn't needed revenge. I just needed distance. The next day, Evan brought me the updated restoration report. "We're almost done," he said, flipping through the pages. "A few more weeks, and Mercer will open for public tours." "That fast?" I said, half smiling. "You work faster when the foundation's strong," he said. "Funny how that works." He wasn't talking about just the house, and I knew it. As we stood there in the finished ballroom, sunlight pouring through the new windows, I felt something shift inside me like the last thread of that old life had finally snapped free. "You ever think about what's next?" Evan asked. "Always," I said. "But for once, it doesn't scare me." He nodded. "Good answer." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was comfortable earned. Later that night, I checked the news again. Dylan's photo had been replaced by something blunter. Pierce & Associates suspended pending federal audit. I stared at it for a long second, then closed the page. I didn't forward it to anyone. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't celebrate. Because some victories don't need applause, they just need peace. And for the first time in a long time, I had exactly that. When Mercer House finally reopened, the morning light hit its facade like a second chance. The scaffolding was gone, the paint cured, the old brass fixtures polished until they glowed. Standing out front, I I realized it wasn't just a building I'd been restoring, it was a mirror. Every nail, every layer of primer, every repaired crack had felt like stitching something inside myself back together. Guests began arriving early for the preview event. Local reporters, architecture enthusiasts, a few investors. The kind of crowd that used to terrify me, the type that would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. But this time, I felt grounded. Maybe because I had nothing to prove anymore. Evan handed me the final blueprint roll, neatly tied with string. "You sure you don't want to give the speech?" he asked. "I think the building speaks just fine," I said. He smiled. "Fair enough." End of section. As people wandered through the halls, murmuring about the craftsmanship, the balance between restoration and reinvention, I slipped away to the back balcony. The city hummed below, traffic light glinting off wet cobblestones. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't replaying a single argument, not one memory, just breathing. That's when my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. But the preview gave it away. "You really did it, huh?" I opened it. "Dylan. Mercer looks amazing. You always had a good eye. I hope you're happy." "I mean that." I stared at the text for a long minute. Then I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. No reply. Not anger, not closure, just nothing. Because some conversations end better when they never start. Inside, Rachel was there too. She'd come quietly, at Evan's invitation, to see the finished project. When our eyes met across the room, there wasn't tension anymore. Just mutual recognition. Two people who had both survived the same storm and chosen not to live under its shadow. She raised her glass. I nodded back. By sunset, the event was winding down. Evan came to stand beside me as the last few guests trickled out. "You did it," he said simply. "We did," I corrected. He looked around the room, the soft lighting, the smooth lines of the restored staircase, the calm that hung in the air. "You know, most people would have walked away after what you went through," he said. "But you rebuilt instead." I smiled faintly. Walking away and rebuilding aren't opposites. One makes the other possible. We stood there a while, listening to the echo of our footsteps fade through the hall. A few weeks later, Mercer House officially opened for tours and private events. The reviews were glowing. "Timeless elegance," one article said. "A quiet triumph of design and restraint." I liked that word restraint. It sounded like dignity dressed in calm. I moved my office to a smaller space downtown, something humble, practical. My nameplate on the frosted glass door read Brooke Allen Designs. No fiancé, no joint venture, no borrowed identity. Just mine. Sometimes clients mentioned the scandal. Savannah's gossip never sleeps. I didn't correct them or feed it. I just redirected the conversation to the work. Over time, they stopped bringing it up. It turns out nothing silences rumor like competence. Evan visited now and then. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to check on progress at my new projects. There was something steady about him, no grand gestures, no emotional performances, just presence. The kind of man who lets silence exist, without trying to fill it. One afternoon, as we reviewed floor plans for a new restoration downtown, he said quietly, "You ever think about what you'd say to him now, if you had the chance?" I thought for a moment. "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." He nodded, smiling. "Then I'd say you've won." "Not really," I said. "I just stopped playing." That night, I walked home under the streetlights. Savannah in early spring smelled like magnolia and rain. The air was warm enough to keep windows open, and the sounds of laughter drifted out from nearby restaurants. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang for the hour. I passed a bridal shop window lace, satin, tulle all shining under soft light. I stopped for a second, not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. Once upon a time, I'd stood in front of a window like that and thought marriage meant safety. Now, I understood it differently. Safety was being able to stand alone and still feel complete. Back home, I placed a single photo frame on my bookshelf, a picture from the Mercer House reopening. I was standing beside Evan and the crew, hair windblown, eyes bright, smile unforced. It wasn't perfect. That's why I liked it. I poured a cup of tea, turned off my phone, and opened my window. The breeze carried the faint scent of paint, and earth new beginnings hiding in ordinary air. Step 11. Peace isn't what happens when the noise ends. It's what you build when you stop needing to explain yourself. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far off, too distant to worry about. Just a reminder that storms still exist, and that not all of them are meant for you. I leaned back, took a slow sip, and let the quiet fill the room until it felt whole again. The grand opening of Mercer House became the last time I ever heard Dylan's name spoken in public. After that, he disappeared from Savannah's conversations the same way a storm fades from the horizon, loud, then gone. No one knew if he'd left town, or if he was still here, pretending not to exist. I didn't ask. I didn't care. Life after him wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. And that was the point. I started most mornings walking through Forsyth Park, coffee in hand, watching the joggers and dog walkers go by. My phone barely rang anymore, except for clients or my mother. I'd gotten used to the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, it just settles in, quietly, like morning light through blinds. Business was steady. Evan and I kept working together on a few small projects, an old carriage house, a gallery remodel, a lakefront inn up in North Carolina. We worked well together, not because of chemistry, but because of rhythm. He respected silence as much as I did, and that was rare. One afternoon, we were reviewing blueprints in my office when he said, "You ever think about writing a book? About design, I mean. Or maybe about rebuilding?" I laughed. "I barely write my grocery lists." He smiled. "Maybe you should. People might want to know what rebuilding really looks like without the fairy tale part." I paused. He wasn't wrong. Everyone loves a comeback story, but no one likes to talk about the quiet part, the months of loneliness, the moments when even peace feels empty, the mornings when you still flinch at your own reflection. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote 3 words. What stays standing? I didn't know if it would ever be a book, but it felt like the right beginning. A few days later, I ran into someone at the farmer's market who used to be close with Dylan. She stopped me near a booth, selling wildflowers. "I heard he moved to Atlanta," she said carefully, as if testing my reaction. "He's been keeping a low profile." I nodded, arranging the flowers in my hand. "That sounds about right. He asked about you once," she added. I smiled faintly. "He used to ask about everyone." She didn't know what to say after that, so she just squeezed my arm and walked away. Back home, I put the wildflowers in a glass jar on the kitchen counter. The petals brushed against the sunlight, fragile but alive. I thought about how some people treat life like a performance, always looking for applause, while others just keep growing quietly when no one's watching. I had finally learned which kind I wanted to be. Weeks turned into months. The Mercer project won a regional restoration award. My firm grew. And then one day, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, no signature, just my name in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apologies, no explanations. Just one line. "You were right to walk away." I folded it neatly, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, not because I wanted to keep it, but because throwing it away would mean giving it weight. That evening, I drove to the waterfront, parked near the edge, and watched the sun sink over the Savannah River. The air smelled like salt and pine, the wind soft but certain. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the one standing in a ballroom full of laughter that wasn't hers, watching her future collapse in real time. She had no idea that losing everything was how she'd find her balance. Now, there was no anger left, no bitterness, just understanding. He declared his ex would always be part of his life. And he was right, she was, because he never stopped looking backward. But I had built something forward, something he'd never be part of again. My phone buzzed with a new message, Evan, sending me a photo from the lakefront inn. The lights reflected perfectly off the water. The caption read, "We're open." I typed back, "So are we." Then I set my phone down and leaned against the railing, letting the evening air fill my lungs. Peace wasn't a place, I realized. It was a decision. One you remake every day when you choose not to answer the ghosts that knock on your door. I glanced at the horizon, faint clouds catching the last of the sun's color. A couple walked by, holding hands, laughing about something small and unimportant. I didn't envy them. I just smiled. Because in the end, revenge didn't look like winning. It looked like freedom. Freedom to wake up without dread. Freedom to build without fear. Freedom to say, I'm fine, and mean it. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the river inland. Somewhere behind me, church bells rang again, marking the hour. I stayed there a little longer, tracing the ripple of water against light. When I finally turned to leave, I felt lighter, not because the story was over, but because I'd stopped needing it to be. And that, I thought, was the truest kind of ending. If you've ever been through something like this, where love turned to betrayal, and silence became your strength, remember, peace isn't weakness. It's proof you survived with dignity. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more cheating stories, revenge stories, and husband betrayal tales that remind us sometimes the quietest endings are the most powerful ones.